Hi, and welcome to Reality Check. I'm your host, Lou Meyer, and this week we're fortunate to have village anarchist John Fletcher on the show. John, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So, folks who don't know John, he's one of the partners in Booktown Books, successful used and new booksellers down on Bank Street in Grass Valley. And John and I have been talking for many, many years about sustainability and community consciousness, social activism, and those sorts of things. And John has some, actually not so unusual, but not usual to the mainstream thinking ways of sustaining our community. So, what?
It looks like we're starting.
Looks like we're going to start over again.
Okay. I'm wearing my peace shirt.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Terry. I thought it was direct. I'm sorry.
You guys did great. It was technical in the back, so just redux here.
That's those gay aliens that I was speaking of earlier.
Mm-hmm. Well, they've been flying around my house lately. Take pot shots at them.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, roll.
Hi, and welcome to Reality Check. I'm your host, Lou Meyer, and this week we're fortunate to have village anarchist John Fletcher on the show. John, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
This is a real privilege. John, for folks who may not know, is one of the co-owners of Booktown Books in Grass Valley, where they sell recycled and new books. And we've been talking for many, many years about social consciousness and community involvement, sustainability, and he's come on the show to talk about a few of his unique ideas. So, well, what do you think? I mean, how about it? We're pretty much there now.
Well, it occurred to me one night, you wake up and can't go back to sleep, and I was thinking, how do we take back our communities? How do we have some control over our lives? And then maybe spread that out to a larger base. Region, county, region, state, nation. And we can't control our lives unless we own them. So my idea is fairly simple. Take a community, just for an example, Nevada City. One of the problems that Nevada City has, its merchants certainly, is very, very high rents. And most of the landlords are absentee, and a lot of them live in the Bay Area or Los Angeles, and they seem to think that they can charge the same rents here as they do there. My idea is to form a community organization, and 501c3. This is all very legal, very sort of both above board and below board. And do a series of fundraisers until you have enough to, say, buy 1 or 2 pieces of commercial real estate. And with the rents from the commercial real estate, aside from money to maintain it, put the rest of it back into buying more commercial real estate. And you can see as it grows, the more you have, the more you can buy. And at a certain point, perhaps you could buy up the whole downtown area, or most of it. You wouldn't have to have all of it. And you could create sort of a parallel government. We have terrible bus service because our taxes, sales tax is down. You have no base to maintain that. You could use the money from rents, once you have a large enough base, to provide public services or whatever you want. And you could lower the rents, because that way you're keeping the community vital, you're keeping retailers able to run a business, and you have some control over what kind of businesses can go in there.
You know, it's interesting you bring up that, that's how we lost Amigos, was a tripling of their rent.
Exactly.
You know, they even said they could pay double even, but tripling of the rent was out of the question. And I've talked to other storefront owners in Nevada City and Grass Valley, and that's the sticking point. Not only do the absentee landlords try and charge maximum money per rent, but they don't do anything to maintain the buildings.
No.
And a lot of folks have had to go in, I know in Nevada City, they've had to go into this sort of mall model of stores in order to each be able to afford their own space.
And yeah, and well, that's basically what we did with Booktown. I had my own store. My wife and I ran a store in Nevada City for 7 years. We were 3 years down on South Pine Street. We had 300 square feet for $500. When we moved to Broad Street, we had 600 square feet, and we were paying $1,050. Now, that rent never changed. We had a very good landlady, except that the building was falling apart. And you walked into the back of the building, and it sloped down. You thought you were seasick when you were walking through to the back end of where the fiction was. But I think if you have a community organization that owns the business district, and it would have to be broad-based. You don't want one or two people controlling it, and maybe the community as a whole could buy into it. That way you could raise more money and perhaps spread out from there and buy, let's say, apartment buildings, trailer parks. Again, lower the rent. You have all this revenue coming in. You don't have to worry about taxes.
You know, and right now with the real estate market, I mean, I don't care what the NAR says, the real estate market is still on its way down. There's an opportunity to buy some of these buildings, and there's admittedly deferred maintenance on most of the buildings in town, be able to purchase them at a reasonable price where you could, if you could get a good quality loan, you could keep the rents down.
Yeah.
You know, if you know what your payment is going to be, the wild card is the interest rate on the loan. What does it cost to service the loan?
Well, see, the thing is that my idea would be if you could raise enough money so you could buy the buildings outright. I mean,
So no loans.
No loans. So you don't.
You eliminate the bank.
You're
interest.
not. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. With that money, you could do other things, like you could create these banks that would create microloans.
You could create your own bank.
You could create your own bank. You could provide the services that government is supposed to and doesn't. And in some way make government irrelevant, which it is anyhow, but that's another story.
Well, they don't think they are. But, yeah, well, this is really a fabulous idea. And doing it, doing it under a 501, you could, clear a lot of decks to be able to make it happen. You certainly want to have some sort of advisory board to, to keep an eye on.
You want to have, an advisory board, and like Jefferson said, you spread the power out very thinly. You don't let anyone gain too much control. You don't want chaos, so you have maybe a paid director that oversees it, and then you have a regular, probably annual or semi-annual audit, so you know exactly where the money's going.
Then you could also decide what kind of stores would move into those buildings, so
Exactly.
it could be something practical or something that services the community rather than just frou-frou kind of stuff that may just serve tourists.
The thing is that these towns have evolved into tourist traps, and some of that, is not a bad thing. But, when you have 3 or 4 stores selling the same Chinese crap, and then, perhaps you could even get the rest of the community involved in it, so you could have locally made items. Again, there's all these possibilities that could grow out of that.
Well, certainly, you call it Chinese crap, but anything that, you would have to pay way closer attention to environmentally conscious products,
Right.
not something, with lead for the kids or made out of plastic, which is all oil-based anyway. We could really, ensure that our community is more healthy.
Well, yeah, and you have in this area some of the most amazingly talented people.
No question.
And creative people. we have a wonderful art scene here. When I first started in the book business here, Gary Stollery, another bookseller, was communicating with a man named Richard Booth in Hay-on-Wye, Wales. And what he did was he found this little dying farming village on the Wye River in Wales, and he was wealthy, came from a wealthy family. He bought 4 of the buildings and turned them into bookstores. Then he invited his bookselling friends from London to come down and open stores there. There's something like 35 stores in a town of 1,300 people. Now, obviously, 1,300 people aren't going to sustain that, but they have worked agreements with bus companies. They run buses from London. They bring people from Europe, all to buy books. And they have the world's largest book fair. I think it goes on for 2 weeks that the London Times puts on. All these possibilities, you know, think of a music festival that we could do here, an art festival. I mean, we do have the Celtic Festival. That's wonderful. But, you know, when we have these other, like the bluegrass and the, what's the other one? The World Fest.
Music, World Fest, yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention all the movie, you know, the Nevada County movies and Wild and Scenic Film Festival, which brings a lot of environmentalists here.
Exactly. And so we wouldn't have to be so dependent on tourists buying the trinkets. That, you know, people coming in for a solid reason to see good films, to hear good music, to see good art.
You know, Penelope Curtis is bringing the California Preservation Foundation convention here coming up in May. And some of the buildings that, like the Miners Foundry, that have been restored, and buildings like St. Joseph's Cultural Center, which need to be restored, are all on their list of places to visit. And some of those venues are going to be where they hold their meetings and their discussions. And it'll go up through Truckee, so the whole county will benefit from that. And having that and the bicycle races and the Wild and Scenic and these other festivals that attract people from out of town will raise awareness of our area. If we can do things like you're talking about and show other communities how to become sustainable.
Well, and also if we could put some of the money that comes in from these, and rather than have them trapped by simply, you know, a few businesses, the restaurateurs and the lodging people make the most money off of this, but find other ways of, you know, having a bike festival. Bike festival. What about the bike shop would do good, but bike-related things, movie-related things. When you have the Wild and Scenic, and certainly,
You know,
that all could be expanded on, and raising revenue for a community fund in order to put this into action.
You know, I saw, even during the film festival and during the huge rains, the streets were really full of people. I spoke with a number of venues, and people were coming in and buying things. Even during the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, people were buying furs at the fur trader. You know, and expensive stuff too. So these kind of events certainly draw out-of-towners. It's nice to have something like that as the draw.
And the other thing is maybe a year-round draw. When I lived in New Mexico, the Santa Fe Flea Market was world famous, and it was as much an art market as it was a flea market. Most of the flea market items were toward the back of the market, and some interspersed, but there were artists, photographers, tarot card readers. I mean, it was really
Eclectic.
it was like a Fellini movie come to life. You know, it was wonderful. And then the Pueblo took it over from the guy Trader Jack who ran it, and some of the more conservative Christian elements in the Indian reservation all but destroyed it. You know, they wouldn't allow certain things, so it's sort of a shell of what it used to be.
You know,
but a lot of possibilities.
The Sausalito Flea Market was similar, really huge in size down in Marin County. And you could tell when that was turning into a non-entity when the junk stuff became pieces. So you used to be able to go and buy like a rusty old tool for a couple of bucks. Suddenly it became an antique and it was a piece and it cost $30. So there wasn't as much interest in attending the event. I think they ultimately paved it over and put in a Walgreens or something. But
Oh, it's a shopping center.
shopping center,
mall,
okay.
yeah.
But I mean, that was a fabulous place to go and find all kinds of obscure items and
Wind up
just-
Victrolas, things like that.
yeah, I spent
cheap.
whole days. Yeah, reasonable. And you're recycling something inadvertently, whether your intention is to do it or not. You're doing something environmentally conscious.
Yeah, I heard somebody talking the other day about one of the things that you never see is a repair shop. Where people can come in and repair household items or have them repaired.
That's an interesting point.
And those
Dave's
that-
shoe, though,
Yeah.
Dave will fix your shoes.
Oh, I know. Those that do exist are like the gentleman who was talking about it, are people in their 80s and 90s who, how long are they going to be able to do it?
That's an interesting point. You think it's like it's such a throwaway economy.
Exactly. And, timed obsolescence.
Yeah, well, look at the technology. Your computer becomes a paperweight in about 6 months based on, the new chips or the new speed of this or size of that. You can't retrofit your equipment to really catch up with the technology of today.
Yeah, and there's, look at automobiles. You used to be able to work on your own car. Can't do that anymore. Not
Well,
without-
nobody, they're going to be paperweights as well. We were talking before the show. I was watching this movie, Michael Rupert's movie Collapse, and one of the things that he points out in there is that people only think of oil in relationship to their car.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't realize is that each tire on the car took 7 gallons of oil to make, and that toothbrushes, anything plastic. I can't even think of all this stuff, but he had a laundry list a mile long of things that were originally oil-based and that everybody uses and don't think anything about. Not only that, the manufacturing process to get all those things involves oil. And there is no oil. So even though, some people would pretend that, there are these huge oil fields and all we have to do is destroy Alaska or whatever, the reality, or those, what is it,
sand tars
yeah,
and shale.
all
oil
that
shale.
stuff. It costs more to set up the drilling rigs or whatever to extract it than you're really going to make a profit out of selling it. And the amount of oil, since we use so many millions of gallons of oil, barrels of oil a day, even running percentages isn't really accurate.
No. The interesting thing is, in the 1930s, Henry Ford built a car that was almost exclusively made of hemp. I think the only thing that wasn't was the frame and the drivetrain.
But they ran on hemp too, wasn't it?
It
Like
ran
hemp
on
oil and
diesel
hemp fuel?
that was made from hemp seed oil, and it was virtually indestructible. There's a picture of him with a sledgehammer striking it, not denting it at all. But so there are things that you can manufacture from that don't take oil. But the thing about oil, and I don't know if you've ever heard Alan Stoller talk about it, is oil has so much energy in it. How can you lift a 70-ton airplane into the air without something that creates an enormous amount of energy from a very small amount of fuel, relatively speaking?
Certainly.
Because these things take about 1,400 gallons just to get them in the air.
I think we're going to have to find out.
Well, we're going to find out, but we're in a state of denial. So that's why if community comes together and we can control our own destinies, we can create community, we can sort of build our communities around our businesses, and so we don't have to travel so far to get to. And
including food and everything else.
exactly. If you go to some, China, they have rooftop gardens. Cuba, which we were talking about, every arable square of land, and they have rooftop gardens. And in the cities where, and there's places in every city where there's land, as long as you have enough sunlight to photosynthesize something. I mean, in shade you can grow leafy vegetables. So there's a way of doing it, but it takes, the first thing is political courage, which seems to be really lacking in this country.
Whereas we mentioned, your anarchist, village anarchist idea, political schmidtical.
Yeah. Well, there's a man.
They're irrelevant.
Yeah, there was a man named Peter Kropotkin. And Kropotkin was considered the father of modern anarchy. And he went through all the various stages from, he was part of the Russian court, but he despised the Tsar. He ended up in the Russian army because he had to go to the Corps of Cadets. And he took, because he was royalty, he could get any posting he wanted. He took a hussar unit in Siberia, as far away from the center of power as he could get. And he studied, he was a naturalist, he studied the communities there, both the human communities and the natural communities. And then he studied the writings of famous naturalists at the time. And he put together a book called Mutual Aid. And he showed how without anyone, any central authority, you can create a viable community, and that those communities that practice mutual aid, the people who come together or creatures come together, have a much greater chance of surviving and flourishing than those that stand alone.
Well, yeah, and that actually is brought out in Rupert's movie Collapse. He talks about a lot of it. There's also another, permaculture as a process. There's an interesting movie out about permaculture where they show a lot of like you're talking about growing your own vegetables, vest pocket parks, where instead of just having walkways that, with grass that has to be mowed, they would grow grapes or apples or food that you could pick right off the trees while you were on the walk. They would also take a portion of it and allow it to be a community garden where everybody could participate. And I remember when I first moved to San Francisco in the early 70s, Raza Park and the Mission and a lot of other areas in town would have these communities sponsored and supported gardens. And people would, go in, maintain them. Everything was organic. There was no pesticide use or herbicides. And they'd grow food for the community. We had, when I was living in outside of Boston in the 60s, we had a co-op that was just our little community. We were a little community of white hippies in a black neighborhood. And we would go out and collect, and everybody would take turns at their households, and we'd collect food and peanut butter and meats and vegetables and everything, bring it to a central location. Everybody would buy in and participate in it, and you'd go home with your box of food. Kind of like the, what is it called where the farmers do that?
CSAs.
CSAs, similar to that. Although you weren't waiting for something to grow in Boston, they were already subsidizing themselves, but you could participate in this and buy food, no taxes, and pennies on the dollar that you would spend in the store.
Well, that's the whole cooperative idea. And, I think in this community, our co-op has kind of gotten a little off track on that.
Well, we're automobile-based. It's hard.
Yeah.
I live out in Chicago Park. Me bicycling all the way down to town to get a box of vegetables. It's
the same with
probably
me.
not going to happen.
I don't live that far from you. And, Brunswick, riding a bicycle down Brunswick, you're taking your life in your own hands.
Than driving your car in the rain, you're taking your life.
Yeah, so it's one of these things that, again, if you have communities and little clusters of where each family can help each other. This idea of the great American individual, this myth that's been, it goes back to the cowboy myth. Edward Abbey used to like to say the cowboy was nothing but a hired hand, and this is one of the most enduring myths in America. They were uneducated, quite often quite violent. It was a nasty, dirty, dangerous job. And anybody in modern days who thinks that they would like to do it, herding cattle in the rain,
they would be
snow.
surprised. It's a survival level existence.
It really is, at $1 a day, which was a reasonable wage for, probably very underpaid for what they did, because they're basically on duty 24 hours a day. And that's what an average workman made. A well-paid workman in America was $1 a day. So it's we have these myths, and they endure. And
The
Mendel-
key word in there is myth.
Yeah. Well, all myths have a grain of truth, and I would probably say more of a myth. They were just out and out falsehoods. They were created images in order to sell products.
Pulp writers.
Yeah, to get people to go to, like the Dime Writer. I don't know if you ever read McMurtry's. What was it? It was a book on Billy the Kid.
I don't think I have.
And he took the Billy the Kid myth and turned it on his head. It's just this dime writer who goes and has adventures with Billy the Kid. And it's just, okay, that's exactly what a lot of this stuff was. It was made up. And people bought it because it was exciting, it was fun. And the dreary life of the workman in this country in the late 19th and early 20th century, it took them away from the misery of their lives. Those that could read.
Yeah, there you go. Well, so we have a couple of minutes left. Let's recap some of these community ideas that you had in mind.
Well, like I said, form a 501c3. Get as much community involvement as you can. Do some serious fundraising. This is a long-term project. This wouldn't happen overnight. But by buying up the commercial real estate in a community, and I'm using Nevada City as an example, and taking that money, turning it around. Well, of course, you'd want to lower the rent reasonably so you could help the merchants. Then using that money to buy other commercial real estate. And the more you got, the greater your pool of resources to buy more. And at a certain point, you could control, if not buy everything, you'd certainly have enough real estate to control the business area and then spread out from there.
Sounds great. As long as on the screen here, moonshinebooks@spiralemail.com.
Yeah, if you want to contact me,
Want to contact John. If anybody has some ideas that might coincide with his, or you might want to participate in these kinds of things, John's the point man now. And we're looking at through my nonprofit and a lot of other groups, we're looking at ways that we can co-relate and have strength in the community. I think one of the things, even if you want to consider politics and voting, they may not listen to one guy, but they're going to listen to a town full of people.
Right. Can I give a little plug for my some upcoming shows that I'm doing at KVMR?
Sure.
On the 3rd, I'm going to be interviewing Utah Phillips' son, Brendan Phillips, who is a community activist in Portland, Oregon, and he works for Sisters of the Road. And on the 24th of this month, I'm interviewing Derek Jensen, who wrote Endgame, about the collapse of civilization.
Oh, excellent.
So,
Now, was there something we were supposed to mention for Eric? I can't remember.
Oh, and I forgot to bring it. Eric Tome, it has, I think, an acre and a third, and he's looking for 3 people to do some community housing, maybe build some houses on that. He's got sort of the groundwork started for dealing with that. And I don't have his email number, but his business number is 273-4002, and that's Tome's Books.
Great.
It's Eric Tome.
Thanks, John. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This
Thanks
was
to
wonderful.
our crew, Gail, Richard, Sam, Scott, Terry, Joe. Is that it? I did it. Okay. Thanks for our crew. We couldn't do it without you, and we couldn't do it without NCTV. And we'd like to welcome Paul Menicucci, the new executive director here. And thanks to everybody here, Bill and Terry. We'll see you next time. And think about participating in your community.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!, where